This episode of Between Turns is brought to you by Stan's Used Pitchforks, offering for a limited time, buy two get one free on all torches. Thank you, Stan, for making the internet a much more lively place.
What I do know is my golden pipes are a little raspy because you want to do this at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Well,
We're going to see how this goes.
I'm a busy man.
I don't know. You are, but at some point you got to put the talent first, John. And I realize that golden pipes are a dime a dozen, and representation is where the magic happens. But we'll see. I'll try to hold up my end of this conversation and not. Do you want to talk about Cheetos? Since this is 30% a foodie podcast now. Which wasn't agreed upon, but...
I had the thought the other day that, we have the jokey opening to the show where we go, what you been playing, right? Because I think that's the worst opening to a gaming podcast show. Mm-hmm. However, we talk about food so much, I think now the relevant question is, hey, what'd you have for dinner?
Yeah, what you been eating? Although I will say, I know no one has tried it, but I got to tell you, Cheetos and coffee are delicious together. And this is not a thing I'm just doing right now in the moment of this podcast because someone left a bag of Cheetos on my recording studio.
They would just disintegrate if you tried to dunk it.
Well, yeah. It's more like a chaser. You know what?
A Cheeto chaser?
Yeah, it's like McDonald's French fries and the McDonald's vanilla shake. Both things are fairly forgettable until combined. And then it's like Voltron in your mouth. And it's amazing. It's the same situation. You can, except for Cheetos are delicious on the regular.
I always thought it was fries and a Frosty because the alliteration really was what it was. But
yeah, I don't like Frosties because that's just a bowl of ice cream. I don't know. I like Wendy's in general, like Wendy's chili. I mean, that's where it's at. But I'm also an Ohio kid too, so I mean, that's the home team in Ohio. So. That might factor into that a little bit.
Interesting.
But I don't know what to do with that.
Hey, well, at least you explained your reviewer bias about restaurants.
That is true. It's very important to...
It was, I mean, seriously, solid move, man. I give you points. I was above board.
Well, no, I think that comes a little bit naturally. I don't know that... Actually, this is actually a good point, John. That was good.
Oh, man.
So do you honestly think that it's necessary for a reviewer to declare their biases? It seems to me like that is, what's the word I'm looking for? It is just obvious. It's self revealing, I guess, if you watch their show at all, what their biases are. And likewise, when someone declares their bias, how is that somehow a shield that protects them from everything they're about to say? Like, I don't understand where I guess what I don't understand is like, where is this weird thing that's erupted? I mean, it comes up here and there and again, but the tide is high right now on people criticizing reviewers about their biases and declaring them or not declaring them, or doing a review show or doing a paid preview and what the differences are between them. Like, I think those things are all obvious, and it strikes me as weird that we have to explain to people how it works and then try to set down rules for people to do these things, when they're not getting paid to do them. There's not a third party.
I think the assertion from a lot of the torch carriers is that they are getting paid in a sense, and that they're getting copies of games. And while I look at that and I go, yeah, however, someone who is on the internet looking at reviews about games they want to buy obviously is very interested in putting games on their shelves. So they're putting that as a very high value. So they see that as a wonderful monetary offering. And the flip side of that is that a lot of the games they're just giving away for reviews aren't games you'd want in your collection anyway. So I wonder how many reviewers actually keep the games they've been given as review copies. And that part of the discussion doesn't even enter into it. But people want to sort of fall back on, well, they are getting paid because they're getting a game that has a monetary value. My response to that is, yeah, but the monetary value of the game, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily equal the work. I mean, you're getting paid 50 cents an hour to do a review because it takes time to do that stuff. And
Yeah, and
I get it.
especially if they have
I get it.
2 or
Internet. That's
3
an
people on the show.
exaggeration. Don't come after me because I said 50 cents an hour. But like, I think that people think that they have an argument there because there is an exchange, and they think the exchange should be sort of leveled out. But I think to answer your question specifically, right, was, do I think it necessary? That's where I kind of raise an eyebrow and I go, necessary, like by what authority or to whom, right? Like, because I don't see it as necessary, because this is kind of just a little. I mean, I get it. It's a big industry. It's a big community. However, in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty small community. I think the question is it beneficial? And the question of, is it beneficial for them to disclose their bias? Again, the question is, who we're talking about. I think that it's beneficial for a reviewer to disclose, hey, by the way, I'm just saying this, so that way they avoid a backlash. But if they're not worried about a backlash, then it's not beneficial to them. So who cares on behalf of them, I guess is the way to say it, if they do it or not.
But, from just on the point of what you just said, that a reviewer shouldn't have to make those declarations of their bias unless they're worried about backlash. I would say if they're worried about backlash, that inherently makes them
a bad
reviewer because
yeah,
they're going to factor that into their review just naturally. They have to if they're afraid of backlash against what they're going to say about this game, even if it's small backlash about the publisher.
That is a bias that says I'm more worried about my appearance on this than I am. You see what I'm saying? Like, and that's actually the larger conversation here. Is that, guess what? Biases aren't just, did someone give you a game? Biases include, why are you even, honestly, if we actually want to be slightly intellectual about this, I mean, journalism explored the topic of bias and topic selection, and how even just picking what stories you're going to chase is inherently based on a personal bias. And that stuff shows very openly and so even if someone is trying to do their job in the most objective manner possible, even just picking which job they do is inherently based on a bias.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, on this very topic in board games, that is one of the primary factors because, in the early days, a lot of the criticism, before the board game media was as big as it is right now, the criticism that got leveled at a lot of these guys was that you only give good reviews. You only talk about games you like, and that selection bias was obvious because they all wanted to speak intelligently about games that, they were reviewing. And the only way you can really do that is to play a game 3 or 4 or 5 times. And if a game was absolutely terrible, they weren't going to play it 4 more times. Mm-hmm. And so they would just not do the review. And why would you?
I would also point out that similarly to the whole backlash comment, if the end game for an individual wanting to post something online that is them talking about games, and you want, publishers to take note of you and start giving you review copies to help alleviate the financial burden of doing the show, you don't do that by taking a crap all over games publicly. Right. So there's another bias that sort of shows that, hey, we're frustrated that people are being super positive. However, them being super negative, it's the reason why a publisher then wouldn't support them, and then that reviewer is going to go under because once they play through all the games on their shelf, they either have to be community supported or otherwise. And yes, I get it now. There are community supported reviewers, and that's fine. But I'm just saying, like, there are lots of reasons, right, to behave in certain ways, and not all of them are apparent to the person who's receiving the information, because I just want to hear about a game. Right. But the person who wants to talk about a game may not be wanting to talk about a game necessarily to tell me about a game.
Yeah, well, I think most of them, and again, this is assigning motivations to people that I don't know, which is never going to be a time where that isn't dangerous. But because of who we are as board gamers in general, most shows I think were designed to share fun. Like, I found this really great game. No one knows about it. Here's a review so that you should be buying this. I mean, even our own show here, right? We've done, maybe 4 shows total that could be kind of considered review shows. And I guess about half of them were positive and half of them were negative. But even then, we didn't really focus on the game all that much. You know, it was, we were talking about philosophical things, for lack of a better word, of what was going on. You know, what was motivating us not to like it, or what was motivating us to like it, not what the game itself was doing, or like what the components were, or anything of that nature. And I don't even know where I was going with that. For real.
Yes, and you know, it's like Top Gun. We got to turn into it to get out of this flat spin.
That's right. I know what I was going to say.
Oh, great. Do it.
What I was getting at was the you know, the motivation of a reviewer to be in the early days of review, to be like, I know a lot about a lot of games, and a lot of people out there don't, because, you know, Euro games had to be imported. They weren't just something you go pick up at the store, and there wasn't 700 online stores to go buy this stuff. You know, you had to import it. And I am sure those early reviewers were just wanting to kind of share their hobby with someone, because I'm sure even the people in their own lives didn't care that much. I mean, a lot of us who are super into board games, you have to look pretty hard. I do a search around my house right now for board gamers on Board Game Geek within 60 miles, because that's the tool I have to use. You know, and I get like 10 hits. You know, and it's not like we're that sparsely populated. You know, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people within 60 miles of me at any given time. And I only get 10 hits, you know, and that's now when board games are literally booming. So I'm sure when kind of this review culture started coming together 10 years ago, you know, a lot of the motivation was probably just wanting to share and interact with other people who like board games. And if you were in a position where you had access to a lot of games, or you found games, you would want to review them and get them out there so people knew what they were looking for. You know, what I was getting at with talking about our show was that the review shows we've done were precisely that, right? They weren't, let's take a hot game and talk about it. It was something we ran across, and we're literally like, no one knows about this. Like, I don't hear anybody talking about this game. And literally every single person I've shown it to has adored it. The heavy gamers have adored it. The light gamers have adored it. The war gamer has adored it. And yet it's not a war game. Like, we need to, you know, I want to talk about this. And, you know, as we made the joke, I want to knock on the doors and, you know, ask everybody if they've seen the light yet. That was kind of the motivation for the couple episodes we did that had come close to being reviews in the traditional sense. You know, and the 2 negative reviews we did, those weren't because we wanted to kind of spread negativity about it in some way. It was because even though we didn't like those games, there were aspects of it that were fascinating. And in a lot of ways, the reason we received it negatively was fascinating. Right? And that was the motivation for doing those review shows. I don't know how, you know, in our format, you know, how we would do a review show where someone just dropped a game on our table and said, review this.
Well, this is the part where I remind you that even if there was a way to do it in the format, I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, even if we did have a way to slotted in the format, it's not something I would necessarily be interested in doing. And the reason is precisely the reason why I kind of furrow my brows with the way people treat reviewers in general, and that is that and let's back up, for that matter, I don't even look at the shows that you call reviews and necessarily think of them as reviews. And it's because I don't ever want to be considered the authority on whether a game is good or bad. I have an opinion, and that opinion is based on a whole lot of stuff that is very personal to me. And I'm happy to talk to nearly anyone about why I think a game is enjoyable, again, to me, or why I think a game is, in my opinion, well designed or thought through, etc. But that's all incredibly personal. Again, I'm happy to share it with people. I'm not saying it's personal to say I don't want to share it. What I'm saying is it's personal in that it's not some sort of proclamation that I think everyone else is going to necessarily buy into or believe. And one of the issues that I have with the way that reviewers are treated is that a reviewer puts their thumb up or down on a game and suddenly that's the call.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's correct. And also there's this weird attitude that says that, you know, like people aren't allowed to be wrong. I mean, we all know that appreciation of a game changes with plays. The first couple plays may be great, and then, you know, play 5 through infinity are going to be horrible, or vice versa. But again, all of that is the alignment of a personal disposition and interest and the way the game functions and all this kind of stuff with the individual. And my opinions on games change all the time, and I know that. And games that I put on the table and demo and immediately run out and buy, sometimes 5 games after that, I go, why did I spend money on this? And I'm warning everyone away from it, right? But I'm also doing it with a little asterisk that says, but just so you know, the first 3 games of this were, you know, in the upper echelon of my all-time game experiences. Those are really complicated conversations that don't fit into a short review that simply tells someone, should I have confidence that I'm spending my money well? That is a difficult thing to do, and it's why I don't ever want to become a reviewer. I don't ever want to be in that position, not because I don't want the light, right, shining on me and my opinion. I mean, obviously, right? I mean, we're putting our voices on the internet, but it's just that I don't want everyone thinking that I am the authority. Like, I want to constantly tell people that I'm not the authority. I'm just a guy with an opinion, and that opinion might change in 20 minutes. And I expressly reserve the right to change my opinion in 20 minutes. Like, the reason I'm so forceful in asserting that, like even here, is because it's not a courtesy I see extended to reviewers. We think that they are supposed to play a game the exact number of times that they need to play it in order to get the perfect opinion that will never change to tell me whether or not I should or shouldn't spend my money. And that forever on now, you know, into eternity, that having spent the $20 or not having spent the $20 is now universally the right or wrong call based on this one person's opinion. That's insane. Like, that is absolutely insane. One, I think it's maddening to even try to build a game collection that way of thinking I'm only ever going to buy the best games even though I've not experienced them, right? And we talked about that. There's this weird agony where you look at your shelf at all the games that people have told you should play that haven't been played, and sometimes they haven't been played because, at least in my case, because I read the rules and I go, I don't think I want to play this, and then I don't play it, and then I feel shame because I should have played it but I haven't played it, but I'm not playing because I don't want to play it, but I don't want to say I don't want to play it. Right? I should just speak up and go, I'm not interested. Yeah. Instead of hoping that the crowd is going to change their opinion so that I could just go, yep, see, I'm one of you guys, when in reality, you know, I have a difference of opinion. There's a lot of sort of deferring the responsibility of choosing games to reviewers. And there's this weird power disparity where we have our wallets, we have our opinions, we have all the information that tells us whether we should enjoy a game or not. But yet we give the authority of how we spend our money to this other individual and then get mad at them when our expectations aren't met.
Yeah.
And I think that's odd. And maybe that's more confrontational than I should be about it. But I think it's odd to put that all on people simply sharing their opinions. And opinions are all biased. All opinions are biased. That's why they're opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, you know, that's where I was kind of asking the question, because to me it's self-evident. Like, bias is self-evident. It shouldn't have to be declared. And I think it's ludicrous that people get upset at reviewers for not declaring where they got the game from. I mean, it's trying to inject some kind of professionalism into an amateur hobby. Right? And until there is a company out there, or the New York Times is paying someone a full-on salary to be a reviewer, they shouldn't have to have zero bias about reviewing a game.
I don't think it's professionalism. I think it's honesty.
Well, I was to extend that, though. Even if they were getting a paid salary, I feel like a reviewer with no bias has nothing to say, right? Because what are they using to judge their games? If they have absolutely kind of no investment in any of it, then why should I believe what they're saying is something they've even thought about? You
Well,
know what I
because people
mean?
have opinions and they can share their opinion for whatever reason. But then it's incumbent upon the people sharing the opinion to say, here's my opinion and here's why I have it.
That's fair. And I think that's probably maybe that's just a format thing where it's easier for me to listen to someone declare their biases if they're actually talking about the thing and interweaving, where these opinions come from. That's interesting. But having this big pharma 35-second talk real fast about where you got the game and how much you paid for it and who asked you to do the review and where, I mean, it just seems so overwrought and unnecessary to expect reviewers to have to do that, and to, take to the internet with your pitchforks when they don't do that. That just seems crazy to me.
I think the issue is one of perceived dishonesty. But sometimes when someone perceives a dishonesty, really it's an issue of misplaced trust.
Right.
Where someone was expecting something of someone that the other person actually was never intending to deliver them to begin with, right? And so the offended party goes, wow, you betrayed me. And the other person goes, yeah, you shouldn't have trusted me. You know what I mean? and I'm not saying that to say like treat reviewers as charlatans and don't give them all this trust, but I'm also trying to say
I'm cutting you off if this goes to the Frog and Scorpion.
Oh dear,
parable.
no, I'm not gonna do that. But similarly to how when we're talking to our friends about board games, we have vetted our friends. Usually because we have common interests and opinions, especially about board games, right? Like I don't play a bunch of board games with people who play board games that I hate.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's self-selection that occurs there. So naturally, I'm going to turn to the people I play board games with and say, what games are you enjoying? Because more than likely, I will enjoy those games. I think the same thing should happen in the case of reviewers. However, I'm not saying that then gives them the license to not be forthcoming about any information that they think is important. I think there's two conversations here. The first conversation is ethics and honesty.
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation, I mean, honestly, if we're really talking about it, will, and for that matter, should continue because it's how we evaluate people and their interaction with society. And so that absolutely will continue. But the second conversation is the one that I personally find more interesting, and that is how we as a community have given over authority to people who maybe not have accepted the responsibility of the authority. And the power disparity, not necessarily that creates in between us and them, but in between expectation and reality in our own minds, and the disconnect that sort of creates between the people with authority, actual authority, and the people with perceived authority, and the people with actual responsibility and perceived responsibility. Because,
well, I mean, that may be the answer right here. I mean, the fact that you can't really put your hands on this, it's too slippery, might be why it's such a rage topic, right? I mean, that's probably...
But it's not even too slippery, because for me and my behavior, I am trying to do the best that I can to be above board, to simply say, in my very long-winded and speed-reading kind of way, I'm a guy with a bunch of opinions and they can change it. And all that stuff to calibrate people's expectations and understand where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Were I a reviewer, I am not. I don't ever intend to be. Were I a reviewer, I would probably spend more time talking about why I thought what I thought than actually dictating what it is that I thought. Because to me, that's honesty. I mean, to me, that's important. And part of that would include like, hey, someone shot me this game. Therefore, I'm going to tell you what's cool about it.
Yeah.
And any astute person could note all the things I don't talk about and evaluate the number of things I did talk about. I would be that person, because that's how I talk in everyday life. And I know that those of you that have real life conversations with me sometimes roll your eyes because you go, oh wait, here goes John again saying the other side of the conversation. Because I think that things are incredibly complicated. And I do think that there's a way through things, and I do think that again, my thumb can incline up or down on a game. However, it's my thumb. It's my thumb.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to control your thumb. I want you to understand that you're still in control of your thumb, which is why I show the other sides of the things, to show exactly why my thumb's where it is, to triangulate the fact that I'm only ever talking about my thumb. if I was a reviewer, that's what I would do. Now, I'm not going to tell other reviewers what to do. However, I will then turn to the audience of torch-bearing people and say, all right, folks, you know what I do in regards to reviewers, and that is I evaluate them based on what I would do were I a reviewer. And if I see them just, boom, here's my thumb and here's what everyone should think about this, that's probably not someone I'm going to trust, because I don't believe that that's a trustworthy conversation, because it's not a conversation. It's just some sort of edict. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And furthermore, the handful of folks that I do turn to for opinions, and note, opinions, are folks who have over the years pointed out specific points that I've agreed with.
Yeah.
Again, not in real time, but I look backwards and I go, wow, we were together on that. I think that's the key here, is that vetting a reviewer in real time is a long, tricky process. It's like making a new friend.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I believe that 100%. Like, watching a review to me is utterly worthless, because the reviewers I trust are the reviewers that I've seen 200 or read 200 reviews from. And that is what informs me of what they're telling me, quite frankly. And the funny part is that it's not even necessarily in the positive. Excuse me. I take Tom Vassel's reviews, and I know going in, we are almost diametrically opposed on what we like and dislike. However, he is consistent enough that when he talks, a lot of times I can tell if I like a game by what he's not saying. And sometimes that review may even be, this game's terrible, no one should buy this, these are the reasons. And I go, well, those reasons are all the reasons I enjoy, so I will buy that game you just told me not to. You know? And it's not just because of what he said, it's because not only did he say it, but I have 10 years of reviews to know the angle he's coming at when he talks about these things. And, you know, a lot of that too is games in the past that he said this bad thing about, and then I play it, and that bad thing was either something that wasn't as big a deal as it doesn't strike me as big a deal as it struck him, or that there actually was a workaround, and the volume maybe of games he's churning through didn't give him time to really process it or whatever. But regardless, I have gotten to know him as if he was one of my friends. Or, you know, if friends is the wrong word, maybe he's my group antagonist. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a love-hate relationship, you know, which side of that you're on, but it's a relationship that's full of information so that you can digest what he's saying. You know, I almost wonder, maybe the torch bearing and hurt feelings and that sort of thing, maybe you were kind of dancing around it. And again, this might be another self-evident thing to anybody who takes 30 seconds to think about it. But maybe the issue is that a reviewer, it's not so much that people are treating it as an opinion for something to think about, but they're actually taking it as advice as to what do I do. When that comes as advice, that opens you up to then doing, and then when it doesn't work, going, this is your fault that I made this decision.
Yeah, exactly. It's misplaced expectation based on someone thinking that it's advice meant to help them instead of advice meant to inform them.
No, it's weird that that's that big of a difference, but I think it must be, because otherwise none of this makes any sense. You know,
I will, again, in my way, sort of go back on what I said, and that is that, again, I'm not saying that every reviewer out there is doing a perfect job. Like, I don't think that at all. I actually think quite the contrary. But again, that calibrates the way that I look at reviewers. I think all of us should have that calibration. And again, to go back to the friend metaphor thing, when meeting a new person, and again, I can only speak for myself, but, you know, when I meet a new person and we're having that sort of polite, you know, get to know each other phase where we don't know everything about each other and we're just sort of having to learn each other by watching each other in different situations. During that phase, it's just sort of collect the info. But way back in the back of my mind, I'm still having to do all that evaluation of, okay, John, you're still responsible to figure out what to do here because you don't know this other person. It's the same thing. Actually, no. Actually, I'm going to go completely back and say that the whole misplaced expectation sometimes comes down to misplaced trust. But I think it's a bad interpretation of what the word trust means. And, similarly to the whole everyone's wrong about Han Solo thing, everyone's wrong about The Walking Dead, because the portrayal of trust in that show really irritates me. Because trust in that show and the response of trust in that show is everyone constantly being shocked that people around them aren't doing things in the interest of the person not doing the thing. You see what I'm saying? Like it would be like if I'm the protagonist and I constantly feel betrayed because everyone is not acting in my best interest.
Mm-hmm.
That is a bizarre way to behave. And that actually is not what trust is. Trust is simply saying, I'm going to do something and then doing it, and have everyone else knowing that I'm going to do the thing I said that I'm going to do. Trust is consistency. Trust is knowing dependably what the bias is and how the bias operates. Trust isn't saying there is no bias. And I think that this is where people feel like reviewers aren't trustworthy, is because they're thinking that the reviewer is there to operate in their best interest. I don't necessarily think that that is the case. Not always. It could be, possibly, maybe, I don't know. However, if sitting down to watch a review, if I don't think that the person is trying to tell me what I should do for my betterment, if I just peel that away, that is what lets me watch a review and then walk away from it knowing that it's still my decision, it's still my authority, and it's still my responsibility to go fill out the rest of the information I need to go before I go make a purchase at the game store.
Wow. That was poignant, sir.
That doesn't mean it was
well
useful
done.
or
No,
good.
no. That was. I mean, I will go so far as to say that just nailed it. So let me ask you this. What makes a good review? What do you expect out of a review of a game to make it useful to you? And the tack I'm getting is there. We've talked a lot about formulas. I've seen when people ask about, what's a good board game review podcast to listen to, I've seen a lot of recommendations for, I want a podcast that talks about 8 different games, spends about 10 minutes on them, and moves on. And I, for the life of me, cannot figure out how that is in any way useful. But it seems to get a lot of traction, or a lot of support from whoever's in particular is being vocal on that. And are people literally just taking a checklist and buying every game that a person says?
I don't know. But again, if someone was to ask me, will you give me a 3-minute opinion about these 10 games, and it be done privately for that one person? Yeah, sure, let's do it. Because I'm interacting with one person. I calibrate what I say to that one person based on the specific questions that's being asked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could absolutely do that. I personally would be unwilling to do that and then put it out there to the masses. And I'm not saying masses to indicate just like, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of people. What I'm saying is the hobby is so big and people are so different that there are combinations of interest, opinion, and vector of enjoyment and all that sort of stuff that I just would never have conceived. And as such, if I'm going to be talking to an infinite number of people, I'm going to have a much longer conversation to hopefully say something useful to as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Really short conversations work in situations that are finite. And I think that, trying to shotgun 30 different snapshot opinions and then throw that out there to everyone and think it's useful, again, it's sort of an odd way to it's solving a problem that I don't think is the actual problem, I guess is the way to say it. So I don't know. What was the question? I forgot.
Yeah, no.
I hope that people aren't taking checklists of top 10s and going to game stores, because that's a recipe for people not enjoying a hobby that they're committing to. That's an expensive hobby. It's one of the reasons why I will not do a top 10 list. It's not going to happen, because I don't ever want someone to go buy games on my recommendation and then be miserable because they don't enjoy something that they think they should, and then feel like there's something wrong with them because I enjoyed and they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I'm never going to put it out there that it is something to be done.
I hear what you're saying.
I know you disagree with it. You've shown me your top 10 list of things you disagree with me on, and top 10 list is number 1 on your top 10 list.
You know what? Well, here's the thing, and this is this becomes a board game format thing. I just think those things are fun. Top 10 lists are fun. Even my top 10 favorite bands, my top 10 favorite books, my top 10 movies.
I love that you're listing lists right now.
Yeah, right. My top 10 lists. No, I don't. I actually, it's funny that you have, I shouldn't say funny. It's not funny. It's
weird.
It's enlightening.
No, it's weird.
It's enlightening that you have your take on it is that I can't tell anyone what they would like. I absolutely think there's truth in that. But, and the big but for me is I don't necessarily struggle with that kind of internal monologue, internal conversation, or however you want to put it. Because
I know you have no problem telling me what I should think.
Yeah, no, it's not. I don't tell you what to think. However, I do not have hesitations to tell you what I think, and I don't have an agenda on changing your mind. It more comes along the lines of, clearly I'm right, so why would you not agree with me, right?
No.
But no, the kidding aside, I don't view this with the point of, I have opinions about what's great, but I know everybody's different, so those opinions are less useful than people think they are. Is more or less what you said.
No, that's not what I said, because opinions are incredibly useful if they're treated as opinions. What I'm saying specifically is that we need to realize opinions are opinions and not think.
Not advice.
Well, it's not even advice. that it's not some hard science. It's an opinion. It's not a Newtonian law that says this game is forever good.
Well, yeah, that absolutely agree with that. I guess what I'm saying is like, I don't look at things with that viewpoint. I feel like this may be a self-serving delusion that anybody who spends a lot of time and a lot of effort in any field has useful things to say about everything in that field. I just take that as an inherent truth.
Well, it's
Maybe
because
it's
of their
not.
expanded context.
Yeah.
And that is an important thing to note as the sort of informational overlay that says, how should I evaluate this opinion, is understanding that they have an expanded context.
And the reason I frame that is that I don't even think twice about giving my recommendation if someone asks, because I've been playing games for 20 years. I've got a billion games. I've played 2,000 games or whatever. I feel like I have spent enough time doing this that if someone asks me which of these are better, I can tell them. And I don't expect them to obey, but I certainly would hope they would think about it, right? And also, too, knowing when I'm offering that opinion, my other time in the hobby and in different game groups and stuff, informs me to take into account, their experience level, who they game with, the types of games they like, if I know. So that certainly is processed and informed, but I don't personally feel like I have, I shouldn't give this opinion. That doesn't even enter into my thought box at all. The internet is a different animal altogether, because, someone posting on a forum somewhere, what game should I buy? That was fun the first 500 times. At this point, I do fully get that as completely pissing into the wind. And I rarely waste my time unless it's, either someone that I already interact with and know, or maybe somebody that I want to get to know. Maybe I will jump into that kind of thread. But, other than that, I realize that's kind of a fool's errand. But, another weird, and I don't know if we've talked about this before elsewhere, but one thing I do find a little bit baffling is, you were talking about how telling people, what they will like and what they should buy. You're only comfortable doing that in a tight group or a single person that you know fairly well, you will give those opinions, but you wouldn't dream of doing it to an audience of 10,000 people. My personal experience in this is that there's less pushback of giving that advice to 10,000 people than there is to giving it to someone sitting across the table from you.
But why is pushback the measurable standard of it being a useful thing?
I don't know why it's a useful thing. It's a weird. Is it a perception on my part?
I see.
Is it not a thing?
Let me do a whole big long lengthy thing about food to explain my opinion. No. I'm honestly part of my direction on this issue actually comes from the whole design thing, where I went to architecture school and read so many books about the quote unquote right way to design, and then I go start working in a firm. And I sit down with people who are paying me to design them a thing, and I ask them, what do you want? And they want everything that I was told was wrong. Over the years, I've talked to enough people, and I saw it firsthand, where a designer would hand a solution that the designer liked to a client, and it was a bad fit. The client wanted something different because they had different tastes, opinions, priorities, etc. And so the designer does the project, thinks it's the best thing they've ever done, and the client is miserable. Now, like, how are we measuring the success of that project? Specifically like a building. Are we measuring the success of this building to simply just be other architects thinking it's a great building? Or are we measuring it as other clients hearing the client enjoy the project and think that it's useful and wonderfully designed and doesn't have any issues and meets their day-to-day expectations, etc.? Like how are we actually evaluating the success of our profession? The amazing thing is that a great designer does all of it. Early on, I was taught and trained and saw the value in sitting down with someone and saying, tell me everything about yourself that isn't related to this project so that I can help you get a good result from this project. And like I know people in firms, for example, that especially if they're doing small projects like residential projects, they'll actually have the people fill out a questionnaire that's even just things like, what are your hobbies? You know, because if someone says that they want a massive kitchen for entertaining, but yet in 30 different questions about how do you spend your free time, they never say throwing parties, you know what? Maybe that's a bad expenditure of the money and the square footage of their house. As a designer, you can find a way to kind of throttle the expectation to match with the way they're actually going to live their life. And that is helping someone get a good result. Mm-hmm. And I think that giving a recommendation on a game is much the same way, because it's only a quote-unquote good, and by that I mean useful recommendation, if the person that receives the recommendation can then use the information in a way that benefits their decision-making process in terms of getting the game. That's why, like honestly, I think that pushback is a great thing to have happen, because if there's pushback, then that actually means someone isn't just taking the inclination of the thumb, hook, line, and sinker, and running with it. Or they're seeing a disconnect and pushing back on it. Or in the very least, it means that they're just not going to listen to what I said and they're going to go make their own decision, which is actually what I want them to do anyway. So I think that's why understanding the client is incredibly useful when giving a recommendation. And I think that it's impossible, actually. And this is part of that disconnect in between what we think reviewing is versus what it actually is. I think it's impossible to recommend to the entire population of humanity, this game is better than that game, and it be a useful thing to do, because humanity is way too big, and humanity also isn't static, because, I mean, that opinion will stay around a whole lot longer than I will. You know, in 30 years, gaming could be in a completely different place where the game that I poo-pooed on might actually be the most important thing in the world, simply because taste changed. Yeah,
that's like reading those old Beatles reviews of, you know, Sgt. Pepper and stuff when they came out. Mm-hmm. They're hilarious.
This is part of the way I calibrate my expectation of reviews. Like, and some of this even just comes down to the way the word review is valued, or not valued, but defined in people's heads. When I hear the word review, my first thought isn't that I'm going to be told if the game is good or not. Like, I actually don't think that's what a game review is, because that's not what I go to receive. I simply go to see what's in the box. How does the game basically work? I want them to review the contents of the box, the rules, the turn, etc. And I think that a lot of people think that a game review is someone evaluating on the whole spectrum of games, time immemorial, is this a 1 or a 10?
Do you think that's an experience thing, though? Do you think, again, a board game boom doesn't happen with tons of new players? That's not disparaging new players or people new to gaming in general. It just is. If there weren't a flood of people playing games that have never played games before or haven't spent any significant amount of time playing games before this year, those people are probably looking for something very different in a review than you are.
And likely reviews and reviewers have been around for a lot longer than the boom.
Yeah, but I think the tendency to be like, what do I buy? What do I do? For a new player right now, there are literally tens of thousands of games. And as you said, it's an expensive hobby. The people are like, what do I do? And then they look to reviews. And they are actually looking for buy it or don't buy it because all the talk about mechanics and how things work is meaningless to them. While you say that this has been going on longer than the board game boom, and I do agree with you that it's been going on longer than the board game boom, there was a different factor in play in that without the board game boom, the gamers are isolated in pockets 200 miles from each other. So in much the same way, it's not that those game players are new, they just didn't have any information coming in. When you are a fan of an underground thing, which board gaming was an underground thing 10 years ago, there aren't a lot of inputs other than word of mouth as to what you should be playing. So again, I think even those old time, when this phenomena was around before the board game boom, it was kind of fueled by the same thing. It was people going, well, I only have access to 5 games. We've played them 200 times. We want something new. What do I do? And even though those people were knowledgeable and gamers, the isolation put them in the same position, or not having a network of information exchange put them in the same position as someone walking into this hobby now when there is a glut of that information out there, but there's also 10,000 times the volume of information to sort through. It ends up weirdly creating the same problem.
That last part is I think the actual topic. There being so many games coming out. I mean, the Gen Con release is insanity. I just don't even look at release lists anymore because how could I possibly even begin to understand what I'm looking at? It's way too much. When there's so much information, I think it's really natural. All the time want something to help me sort that information. Show me someone please show me the things I need to care about. However, I know for me and from my experience that I'm rarely going to be my happiest by playing the games that other people recommend for me because my tastes are different. I mean, video gaming was the exact same thing, where when video gaming was at its height, people actually had full paid salary jobs with benefits being game reviewers. It was the exact same problem because we had these big AAA titles from huge publishers and we had reviewers and we had conversations about bias and all sorts. I mean, it was the exact same thing. And I'm the person over on the outside going, I'm not playing those games anyway. Like, I honestly would rather play something coming out of a small studio doing something really goofy.
Yeah.
This isn't my sort of like anti-commencement speech where I tell everyone to get off the treadmill, go live your life or anything like that. But I think that pointing the finger at player base and saying that this would be a smaller problem if people simply had more experience isn't necessarily the answer when a solution is being provided them that robs them of the experience. Trusting nothing but top 10 lists to tell them how they should fill out their games is robbing them of the experience of discovering what games they want to play.
Man, it almost makes me... Maybe it's a justification thing that they're hung up on, why am I spending time watching this reviewer? Because review shows are boring. How big's the box? What's it weigh? How thick are the cardboard components? I mean, there's certainly things that can be referenced in a review while you're talking about something else. But focusing on those things off a checklist and going down the line of, well, everybody always wants to know about the artwork and everybody always wants to know about the thickness of the cardboard counters and everybody wants to know about how sturdy the cards are and how well they shuffle. Too many review shows are going down this checklist of just these scripted one-word answers that over the course of 40 reviews are completely repetitive and completely redundant and so boring. And in reality, the shows you want to watch, the ones I want to watch, are like shut up and sit down. And the funny part about that is their reviews are utterly worthless to me. You know what I mean? Because I literally disagree with almost every word that comes out of their mouth as far as what makes a great game. But the reviews are entertaining. Like, I'm not paying anything for it other than my attention. But my pay is to watch those guys perform. It has nothing to do with what they're saying. And I wonder if just harping on the actual review itself is some weird way of justifying why I've spent an hour watching this guy stand in front of a camera in front of his board game collection and tell me how much a game weighs and the dimensions of it if it fits on his shelf. It's so weird to me that all of the shows are doing that because people are demanding weirdly that they do it. When you look at recommendations of what kind of shows should I watch, what reviewers should I do, those are the shows that are getting pushed. Like, these guys tell you everything you need to know about a game, and the review show itself is dry as dust. It's a really weird thing. Maybe the key to this is just, watch more entertaining YouTube videos. You'll have less need to go pitchfork somebody because they are doing a paid advertisement for Kickstarter. I don't know. It's really strange.
I have absolutely no problem with someone talking about weight, dimension, the color of a print, and all that kind of stuff. It actually is somewhat useful information. If a print run of a game is badly printed, that's actually some Consumer Reports kind of stuff that I would want to know. And I'm perfectly fine with there being people that want to put out Consumer Reports based, reviews. They're simply just, here's the content. I actually understand why people would want to go after that type of content. But then the flip side is the reviewers that do take the chance of stepping out there and saying good, bad, and here's why. Even when I disagree with them, I seriously appreciate that they do it, because the expanded discussion of what makes a game good or bad in their opinion, not just good or bad, it's that whole thing of you listen to someone and you can hear what they prioritize and you can hear what they value. And then you can sift that through an assessment of, well, okay, John, is this something that John values? And if the answer is no, well, then maybe the game would be better in my view, because the thing that ruined it for them isn't the thing that's going to ruin it for me, because my priority list is different. And so even when I do disagree with the opinion of a reviewer on what makes the game good or bad, it's not worthless. It has tons of worth if they give me the information to then figure out where I am in relation to where they are. And that's where the expanded conversation is incredibly useful. And the reason I'm saying this is because I do think a lot of the discussion about reviewers being of worth or worthless, a lot of time just comes down to people ultimately saying, I agree or disagree with the reviewer, and having their opinion. And I think that that's not really a great way to kind of go about evaluating reviewers, much the same way that I don't think it's a good way to go about evaluating games. Similarly to how it's useful to learn what I as an individual enjoy about games through this process of trying them out, experiencing all that is on offer in terms of mechanics and theme and play mode and all that kind of stuff. And I sift through all of that to find out the stuff that is my favorite. I think that the same thing has to be said about conversations with others and learning how to take the information that someone gives me as to whether or not a game is quote unquote good or bad, and using the why they're telling me it's good or bad. I can start sort of listening to them and go, okay, I understand exactly why you think this game is bad. And I agree with you that if you value this, that game would be bad. But you know what? I'm still going to buy a copy because those three things that were just listed aren't on my spectrum of negativity. Therefore, if that's the worst part about this game, I'm probably going to like this game. That is I think a useful thing to do. And I think that, well, I'm saying this because I don't want to sound like I'm being anti-reviewer, because I'm not anti-reviewer. Mm-hmm. I am very much pro anyone for that matter who wants to go out there and say, here's my extended opinion as to why I do and don't like this game. And the useful thing about a reviewer is if they continue to do it, it's not just this one hit conversation that ends up being incredibly long and involves a lot of discussion about food, because the person is self-conscious and wants everyone to know why they think what they think, which is what happens when I open my mouth. But when it's a reviewer and we as a community can get to know them and their tastes through this long arc, that is incredibly useful. And I think that we should champion the reviewers that go out there and actually do give us their extended opinions that include why they think what they think. Even sometimes playing devil's advocate to themselves and say, you know, I fully understand that there's a flip side to this, but for me and my table, here's kind of the way I want to do things. And we should, as a community, hold them up and you know, support them in that kind of stuff. However, it also takes a change in the way that we even talk about reviewers, and just sort of saying it only has worth or not having worth depending on it lining up with my opinion, I think sometimes builds the institution of reviewing, quote unquote, to look like us, when again, we don't want it to look like us. We want it to look differently because we want it to inform the holes in our opinion.
Right.
Man, there's oh gosh, I'm actually remembering a really cool book that I read a long time ago now. That it was all about how when a culture builds an institution, the institution ends up looking a lot like the culture that it builds, but yet the culture then looks at those institutions and says, you are informing the culture. And so there's this weird like chicken or the egg thing, like which came first, the culture or the institution? Mm-hmm. And which is actually informing the other. And the answer is, well, both. I think it's the same thing with reviewers, where we as a community are kind of getting the exact reviewers that we've been asking for because we're the community that supports them. And if we keep on asking for these simple, like, I don't want to hear a lot of content, I just want the facts, and then just show me which direction your thumb is facing, that's exactly what we're going to get. Yeah. And then we're actually going to find out we're not getting the full story. And if we assume that we are, we're going to go, oh my gosh, this is an untrustworthy person. When in actuality, when we rolled that character for our campaign, we rolled a distrustful character. We actually asked for it instead of asking for a long conversation about it.
Right.
I don't know. I think we all just need to talk more.
Yeah,
Maybe.
no,
I certainly am doing my part to talk more.
I mean, there's certainly validity to the hero Gotham needs, but the hero Gotham deserves kind of thing in this. You know, I mean, you're right. We are in, you know, as a whole, like as a whole community, we are requesting that a reviewer show true neutrality and treat this as, you know, an independent third party is paying them a salary to do the job, right? And then, you know, that personal requirement to be able to spend that much time, you would need that to be your job. And for that to be your job, somebody has to pay you. And so we ask for these reviewers to treat the job with that kind of respect and dedication, and then get mad at them when they get an endorsement and start collecting money to do their show. You know, whether that's paid previews on Kickstarter. You know, as soon as a nickel arrives from any person in the gaming industry, suddenly that reviewer is tainted, and that reviewer is kind of the distrustful character because they are taking bribes for their reviews. And ultimately, you're getting what you asked for and then getting mad about it. So I guess we try to figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle.
The silly thing is us asking for people to be above board, but then not being willing to be the oversight and curation.
Right.
We, as a community, are the ones that can control this because we can listen and we can assess this stuff. But demanding that they just behave better without us saying that we want to put in more effort is kind of just odd. I mean, it actually... I'm going to talk about food. We had a couple come over and we were cooking for them, and
you know, we have to do a cooking show now and just talk about games.
Oh, we should
between meals.
We had a couple over, and we had heard that one of them had food allergy issues, and so we asked them the question, hey, is there anything that we should avoid, because, you know, we don't want to send anyone to the emergency room or anything like that. The response that came back was, I don't eat X. However, if I don't know it's in there, it won't be a problem. I ranted for about 3 hours about the definition of allergy versus preference. And then we proceeded to just smile and go, okay, cool. And then we didn't even talk about it, right? I feel like this situation is a bit like that, where we're saying, don't put any bias in my review. However, as long as I don't know the bias exists, I'm perfectly cool with it.
Yeah.
But I mean, for those of us on the other side, it's not even really a problem once it's properly defined and understood. We just sort of realize it's something that we have to adjust to deal with, and we can just carry on normally. And I don't really have a punch for that, I guess.
That's no moon? I'm sorry, I'm bad at improv.
Yes, and